I'm grateful for my first birth experience, for Alo's birth, in the way that it humbled me and it opened my mind and made me more prepared. And it gave me perspective. It gave me the perspective of like, this was an imperfect experience. It was hard. It was challenging. The second time around was so lovely, but I don't know that I would have appreciated it for what it was if I hadn't had that much more challenging experience the first time. So I always say I'm grateful for both and wouldn't change a thing. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Wealth for Culture podcast. This is your host, Chelsea. And today, by request, I'm going to share the pretty crazy story of my first birth. And then I'm going to share the relatively less intense and more chill story of my second birth. And after that, I'm going to give you some tips and advice on things that I learned along the way by having two wildly different experiences, both valuable. And after that, I'm going to share how I'm doing in my pregnancy now that I've entered third trimester, and I'll just kind of review what my second trimester symptoms were like. So if you're interested in all things birthing, wellness, pregnancy, deliveries, stay tuned. I have some stories for you. So first of all, my intention in sharing my stories, it is kind of a personal, private thing. And I thought about whether or not I wanted to share the details here. But the bottom line is, I know that especially during my first pregnancy, when I had never experienced anything before, I loved hearing the birth stories of other women. I found it so valuable. Stories are the best way to learn and remember details on things that you might experience. Maybe by hearing my story, you'll think about some questions that you might need to consider for yourself, or things that you might want to ask your doctor or your midwife or your provider. Something might come up that helps you prepare for your own. And so with that, I think it's worth it to share. So let's just jump right into it. I first got pregnant in 2017 and I had my first baby at age 30. My journey with prenatal care during that pregnancy was fairly tumultuous. I won't get into it too much, but first of all, I went to an OBGYN that was just not good. I had a horrible, 2 or 3 first appointments. And I just felt not only mistreated, but I felt that I had sort of received some wonky information. I wasn't getting questions answered that I needed answered. To be honest with you, I felt like I was being treated like a statistic, and the care aspect just wasn't there. So after that bad experience in the medical system, I ended up finding a birthing center and a midwife where the care became really personalized, much gentler. It was obviously not a medical environment anymore. And I felt that my culture and my background as an Indigenous woman were accepted and embraced in that birthing center environment, as opposed to what it was like for my first few doctor's appointments. So I ended up getting the rest of my prenatal care through a midwife at a birthing center in Phoenix. And nothing but good things to say about prenatal care in that circumstance. But then what happened is my due date came and went and went and went. And pretty soon I was 2.5 weeks past due, which by then you're considered high risk. And I had not planned in the slightest or even considered the idea that I would have to go into a hospital. So I had to scramble last minute to figure out a hospital to go to. I had to scramble last minute to mentally prepare myself for that different experience that I wasn't now going to have. And that felt a little bit chaotic. But anybody who knows, when you're getting like that far into the pregnancy and you're down to the wire and your due date has come and gone, it starts to feel pretty urgent and you start to get nervous and worried. And yeah, people have pointed out to me before that there are ways I could have worked around going into the hospital, and I understand that, but it was my choice at that point. It felt like the smartest thing to do. So I went in, and long story short, I'm not going to get into the very fine details, but I then went through 4 days of inductions. So I received Cytotec, Cervidil, neither of those worked. Foley bulb, that didn't work. Membrane sweeps. And of course, meanwhile, my midwife from the birthing center came with me to the hospital. My husband was there, my mom was there. I had a lot of support people. And my midwife was doing all of her midwifery magic while she was there. And none of her techniques or in more natural sort of induction techniques were working either. I was continuing to exercise, continuing to walk, you name it, all of the yoga positions, the cat cow, the medicine ball, like all those things. Nothing was working, obviously. And 4 days into it, after receiving, I think 2 rounds of like the ultimate, like the highest possible doses of Pitocin, I never dilated, not a single centimeter. And I never went into labor in any way, shape, or form. My waters didn't break. I never had any contractions. Nothing. It was crazy being that far past my due date and also having received that many medical interventions, and I still never went into labor at all. Again, I mean, just sort of a bizarre circumstance, not something that I considered or planned for or imagined would ever happen to me. And people asked, what were you doing during your third trimester, during your pregnancy? I was exercising every day. I was lifting weights. I was walking. I was hiking I was on mountaintops when I was this big. And, I was doing all the things and it didn't work to make anything progress. So that's just to say you could be doing all the right things and it still might not work out in your favor. Birthing is just so unpredictable. It's different for every woman, and you never know what your experience is going to be like. So at that point, I always remember the doctor came into the room and he was like, listen, your uterus is supposed to be pumping and contracting at this point, like very strongly. That's what labor is. And he goes, right now, because of all these inductions that failed, your uterus is literally limp. Like it's not doing anything anymore. And we need to get this baby out of you. Will you consent to a C-section? In his opinion, and in the opinion of numerous other midwives and nurses that were working with me, and in the opinion of my own midwife, who I brought from the birthing center, everybody there was like, I think this is the safest choice at this point. And I was like, fine, no big deal. I didn't resist it. I didn't fight it. Even though I had never considered having a C-section, it wasn't something that I was like staunchly against by any means. And it was just crazy. Like I almost didn't even have, like I'd been through so much at that point that I didn't panic. I didn't necessarily feel disappointed. I certainly didn't feel disappointed in myself. Like I knew that it was out of my control. I was just grateful to be receiving the medical care that I needed. And so I went in for the C-section, continued to experience some hiccups. So by that time, they had administered a spinal tap and it didn't work. They did this little process where they were testing my abdomen, kind of like pressing their tools into the area where they would perform the surgery. And they were like, if you can feel this, like tell us exactly where, we're feeling at this point. And I was able to tell them like within an inch. I was like, I can fully feel everything. And that happens. And so one side point is like, read the articles about, even if you do not want to have a C-section, you're not planning to, read the articles about how common it is for a spinal tap to not be sufficient enough to numb you for a C-section surgery. It's very, very, very common. Women go through the harrowing experience of not trusting their own body, that like they just think like this is the common method. Surely it must work. They don't say anything. They don't speak up for themselves. The doctors don't notice. And then they feel their freaking surgery. So I'm so glad that I spoke up for myself. And I was like, no, I feel this. I'm not going to go through with this unless you put me to sleep. Great. So they put me to sleep. Because of that, my husband had to leave the room. Otherwise, he would have been in the room while I was getting the surgery performed. But he had to leave the room, put me to sleep. C-section happened. Obviously, I don't remember any of that, but I do remember waking up, and I found out later that I was very much in my out of the surgery room and in my regular hospital room, my recovery room, when I came to and when they brought my baby to me. But in my memory, I'm like being wheeled down the hallway. Like the way that I was experiencing it in my memory is I was in motion. And that's obviously a side effect of like the painkillers and the drugs. And that was like very disorienting. And I remember one of the cool things about that I delivered at an Indian Health Service hospital is there was a Hopi woman there, an elder, and she was there as a support person for birthing moms, and she was like smudging me. And I just, the smell of those medicines, I could cry. Like that was a comfort. That was my only comfort in that moment. And so culturally responsive care is so critical, so important that I'll never forget like the comfort that that brought me amidst the chaos of like the medicine and what I had just endured. So the next thing I remember, pay attention to this part. They were like asking me if I wanted to meet my baby. Of course I did, but I was still out of it. And the overwhelming feeling that I was experiencing was pressure in my abdomen. And I said, I have to go to the bathroom. I have to go to the bathroom. And one of the other nurses, who is not as good, to me, I could be misremembering this, but it felt like she was scolding me. And she said to me, isn't it more important to meet your baby right now? Something along those lines. And I was like, I just couldn't even make sense of that. I was so out of it. But I thought about it later and I was like, she shouldn't have said that to me. That was like a really disrespectful thing to say. Obviously, like the physical response that my body was experiencing was so overwhelming to me that that's what I was voicing. And I was like, I just felt this immense pressure. It felt like I had to go, number two. And nobody said anything about it. They just, I think they thought I mean, I was out of it. They didn't take that as like a sign for anything bad necessarily. And so then Thosh had been in a different room he had been in the same room, like on the different side of the room doing like skin to skin with Aloe. And that is a whole interesting, I mean, I had to hear that whole story later on. Like I just had no idea he was having this like beautiful dad experience being like the first one to hold her. And he spoke to her in autumn. So that was the first word she heard, and he was singing to her. And I'll let him tell his side of it at some point. But I'm really, happy to hear that they had that time together while I was kind of waking up from the surgery. And Aloe had a very calm and good experience of like her first few minutes on earth with her dad. So then they handed me the baby and she latched right away. I do remember that. That was such a victory. It was like total instinct kicked in for both of us. And I'm just like watching her and she's latched, and I was a little bit disoriented and like I didn't know if I didn't feel like super stable holding her, but I do remember just feeling so grateful that she was able to like get her milk right away. And that wasn't an issue for us at all. I would continue to breastfeed her for 2.5 years and it all went well. But anyway, then I don't remember the order of events, but at some point I was bleeding. Thosh had taken the baby back. All of a sudden I'm just like surrounded by nurses. There's like 6 or 7 care providers around me, and the doctor was rushed in, and I was clotting really badly. So that was the pressure that I felt. And I believe they had to reach in and like manually try to remove some of the clots. I was still like fairly numb from the medication, so it wasn't necessarily a painful process, but it was uncomfortable. And it turned out that I needed to then have 2 blood transfusions because of how much blood I lost. And the reason is that my uterus was so weak at that point. As the doctor had mentioned before the surgery, it wasn't pumping and working as it should have. the recovery from that surgery, and again, I won't share too many more details necessarily, but the long story short is it was scary. It was mm, just short of traumatic. And we're just so different. I mean, my intention was to have a natural, unmedicated birth in a birthing center. And everything I was reading and everything I was preparing for was in that realm of natural birth. So to have experienced the complete opposite with pretty much every medical intervention you can imagine was humbling, to say the least, and a major learning experience. I don't regret any of it. I don't criticize myself or anyone else for the way that it went. I came out healthy with a healthy baby. And what more could you ask for? I would be remiss to be anything other than grateful for the outcome, but it was certainly a surprise. So that was the story of my firstborn. And if I could go back and do anything differently, I would have simply been more open minded and read more and listened more and heard more about stories of women who had C-sections because I ruled it out. I was like, that is not going to be me. That is not in my plan. It will never be me. And it was. So very humbling. And I wish I had been more open minded to the idea because then I would have been a lot more prepared. And I think the only thing I could have done differently that would have made it smoother is stopped at some point going through all the inductions to try to force the vaginal delivery and maybe to have been more aware of how's the uterus doing and any signs of the uterus slowing down than to just say, let's go in for the C-section before it becomes too much of a risk. So, because you need that uterus to be working and contracting even when you're having that surgery, because for after the surgery, after the delivery, your uterus needs to continue to be working to pump your blood. So, apologies to any medical professionals out there if I'm not adequately explaining that, but that's sort of my understanding, my interpretation from everything the doctors told me. The other thing I'll say about that is since we did end up ultimately spending 7 days in the hospital, 4 days of inductions, C-section on the fourth day, and then 3 days in recovery, it was like the craziest experience coming out of the hospital. And like, I just remember on the drive home, first of all, feeling almost a withdrawal from the nurses and from that environment of care. I was like, I had some really awesome native nurses. Shout out to Brandy, especially. I still remember you if you're hearing this, but I had so many. There's another one. I think her name was Lisa. They were so good. And, people talk down on IHS a lot, but I could have chosen any other hospital, but I chose IHS because I knew I would have a lot of native nurses. And it made a difference for me. I felt comfortable there. I bonded with them. It was just a good experience. And I missed them when I left and I was like, oh my God, no, it's me taking care of this baby. I don't know what I'm doing. Of course, instinct kicked in, but on that drive home from downtown Phoenix all the way across toward, driving to our condo in Scottsdale, I was just looking out the window and I was like, wow, everything is so clear. Everything was so crystal clear and vibrant. And it was almost like a rebirth for myself. I was like entering into the world with new eyes. And that's an experience I'll never forget either. And the recovery from the C-section, some of the things that surprised me was I wanted to keep my catheter in. I didn't want to get up and walk. But of course, the nurses were insisting and guiding me through that process. And I'm very glad that they did. I went home with some kind of devices still attached to help with like drainage and stuff. And then you deal with like swelling and all in all, the recovery from the C-section, I didn't know any different, but after my second birth, which was a VBAC, I could say the recovery from the C-section was way, way, way harder than recovering from a vaginal delivery. I mean, not even a question. And I'm amazed by the women that have 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 C-sections because I'm like, oh my God. One was plenty. It was not the easy way out. It was way harder. in my opinion, having a C-section than having a VBAC. So, spoiler alert, obviously, now I'll talk about my second delivery, which happened in 2020, height of the pandemic, and it ended up being a VBAC, which was what I was hoping for. Things that changed second time around, I did decide to do all of my prenatal care the medical route, but I found a different doctor, a different clinic, and different providers, and they were amazing and no complaints. It was very standard. I kind of knew what to expect that time around. The pregnancy was uncomplicated, thankfully, because I was already considered high risk for the fact that I had had a prior C-section. I knew that I would have a hospital delivery, which is why I didn't go back to the midwife. But yeah, I just found like a different clinic for my prenatal care, and it was fine. And it was so crazy how it worked out so smoothly the second time around. Oh, sorry, I forgot to share this detail of why I never went into labor. So I found out later on, I mean, I knew it at the time, but I didn't realize the degree to which it would affect me. Allo was positioned, but sunny side up is like the informal term, but she was faced outward and the baby's supposed to, she was head down, but she was faced out, whereas they're supposed to be faced inward toward your vertebrae. And because of that, and because I was pretty small and my hips never opened up, she just never descended to the birth canal. And she had the cord wrapped pretty aggressively around her. And I guess it was just a perfect storm of circumstances where she just would not descend at all, which is why my body was never triggered into contractions or labor in any way. So obviously, like I said, the midwife had tried all kinds of different like maneuvers to twist her and it never worked. But that's why. And so the second time around, when it was getting into third trimester, I was much more asking a lot more questions about the baby's position. And she was in the standard position, head down, face inward, where she's supposed to be. So I kind of figured that I had a better chance of just going into labor naturally, which I did. So it was on the due date. I woke up like midnight to my first ever contraction. And I was like, this is what that's supposed to feel like. Okay. And it was so funny because it was painful, of course, but I was just so happy that I was going into labor. I was like, because when you feel it, it's not a question. Up until that point, up until the very point that I experienced my first contractions with my second born, I literally wasn't sure whether or not I had ever had any. And then the minute I felt that, I was like, oh, that's what a contraction is. It's unmistakable. So if you're wondering whether or not you're having a contraction, you're not. Like when you have it, you know. And so starting in contractions about midnight, I remember like sleeping on and off. We had this like massive king bed and like Thosh and Aloe are sleeping. And I got up and we have a bathroom in our bedroom. So finally about like 4 a.m, the contractions were getting close enough together and so intense that I was pretty much couldn't sleep anymore. I remember I got up and like drew a very hot bath, and, like took a hot bath, and my mom was flying in that day. So it like worked out perfectly. I was like, okay, my mom's going to actually be able to like stick around, not just for the delivery, because after Aloe was delivered, she had already taken so much time off work that she had to fly home pretty much immediately after Aloe was born. And that was so sad. So anyway, the way we planned it this time worked out. I went into labor and I just tried to hold off as long as I could. Like they kind of tell you, my water never broke or any of those like movie moments. But yeah, it just continued to progress. The contractions got closer and closer together and more intense, more painful. I remember I was in a significant amount of pain on the way. We decided, okay, we'll pick up my mom from the airport. She landed at 11 a.m. And then, so we picked her up. We were at the hospital by noon and checked in, and I was like 4 centimeters dilated. So again, another immediate victory for me because I had never dilated before. So I was like, yes, I'm actually in labor. Everything was good. It was like painful, but I was so happy, you know, cool experience. And the interesting circumstance with my second born is that I chose to have my mom as my support person in the hospital. And Thosh was like, he's very much like, your ovaries, your choice, like he didn't have any sort of ego about wanting to like catch the baby or to like be the first, like, he was like, no, like, birthing is women's business. Like, you guys know what you're doing. Donna has had 4 babies. That's my mom. He's like, you guys are the experts, like, do your thing. And that made me feel good because I didn't want Aloe to have a night away from both parents because she had never spent a night away from us before and she was only 2 years old. And the other thing, the reason that I had to choose just one person that time is because it was the height of the pandemic. Very, very strict with like masking and quarantining and everything at that point, especially in a medical environment. And so they were like, not only can you only bring in one person, but you can't have people like come and go. Cause we asked, I was like, could I like bring my mom and then could she leave once delivered and then Thosh come in? And they were like, nope, you're bringing one person. And if they leave, they're out and nobody else is coming in. I was like, okay. So I had to pick my mom. And that turned out to be a really good choice. We had fun. We just hung out. And my mom is like my rock, and she was so chill. And she had been there through the craziness of my first birth, and she was very committed to making everything, just supporting me through having an easy as possible delivery the second time around. And it was probably about 10, 11 p.m. by the time I was really progressing in labor. When I hit like 8 centimeters, I believe is when I asked for an epidural. And the pain was pretty intense at that time. And I'm not scared of needles or anything, and I have no ego about epidurals. In fact, I was very committed to, like I said, I wanted this birth to be as easy and smooth as possible. And so I was more than open to getting that pain relief. I probably would have gotten it even sooner, but I was a little nervous that either it would wear off by the time I had to actually deliver or that it would numb me so much that I would stop feeling any progress. So I think what I did turned out to be a good choice is I just waited until I was like pretty far along, 8 centimeters. And once they administered the epidural, I took a nap, which was amazing. I slept for, I don't know, an hour or two. I have no idea. And then I remember I woke up and I was pretty much fully dilated, ready to go. And the nurse was aware that I had never vaginally delivered before. So she coached me through like the breathing and the positioning. And she goes, let's do a little test push. And I did that. And the baby crowned like right away. And she was like, whoa, whoa. She had to stop me from the test push. She was like, I got to get the doctors in here. You're ready to go. So all the doctors came in, and for both of my first 2 kids, I didn't know what the gender was. So it was a surprise that Aloe was a girl. It was a surprise for my second one when the doctor came in, literally one push, and the baby was out, fully out. And they handed her to me. I was awake. I was alert. I was like, it was super surreal, but like she cried right away. And I remember how slippery she was, and I wasn't quite prepared for that, but just like Aloe, she latched, and they, like, held her up, but I couldn't see, it was really dark, and she was, like, wiggling a lot, but the doctor goes, "It's a girl," and everybody was like, "Oh my god," like, they knew it was a surprise for me, and it was so cool because every single person in that room was a woman. The doctor, the nurses, my mom, me, Weston. And that was, I think it's really cool to have welcomed Weston into that matriarchal environment. And Thosh loves that story too. And my mom was, of course, updating Thosh very feverishly over text, like, throughout the whole process. Yeah, it was a good memory. It was easy. Like, I think I tore a little bit, but I wasn't even like aware when they were sewing me up and I think for me, and again, this is not going to be everybody's experience, but the epidural worked just right to where I could still feel quite a bit of what was going on. And like I could move my legs, I wasn't like fully numb from like the chest down, like some people experience, which is really scary. Some people even have a hard time breathing because they get so numbed. For me, it was just like more kind of like waist down, and I could still feel enough to like move my legs and to be able to fully be aware of like my pushing and my breathing and all that. So worked out just right. And I'm going to try to do probably the same thing the third time around. Yeah, I didn't end up clotting or having to have any blood transfusions that time. The recovery from the vaginal delivery was way easier than that of the C-section. I just remember going home and feeling great. Because the other thing with the C-section was like I woke up with, like my mouth was so dry and I just like wanted ice and water so bad. And it was this whole dance of like what medications are going to be enough to like help with adequately with the pain. But I'm also like super, super sensitive to medication and I get very nauseous. And so I did not want any of like the scary, like oxy type, oxycodone, oxy, whatever it is. I didn't want any of those beyond what was like absolutely necessary. So I pretty much recovered, did the whole, even though they prescribed me that stuff, I finished I did all of my recovery with just like Tylenol. And yeah, just the second time around, I didn't have to worry about any of that. Again, yeah, VBAC was a much smoother and better experience for me. And I actually enjoyed it. It was nice. And what I always say is like, I'm grateful for my first birth experience, for Aloe's birth, in the way that it humbled me and it opened my mind and made me more prepared. And it gave me perspective. It gave me the perspective of like, this this was an imperfect experience. It was hard. It was challenging. The second time around was so lovely, but I don't know that I would have appreciated it for what it was if I hadn't had that much more challenging experience the first time. So I always say I'm grateful for both and wouldn't change a thing. So my goals for this time with this pregnancy is to do another hospital VBAC. I've been doing all my prenatal care with a native midwife at the like a standard medical clinic. So it's kind of a mix. And I find that that balance is what works for me. In general, what I can say about like the midwifery natural birth camp versus the hospital birth medical camp is they both have their pros and cons. And you'll find good people and bad people in both industries, okay, in both fields. The natural birth people and environment can be even more judgmental. I feel like the whole thing is people are decolonizing birth, people are reclaiming traditional birthing practices. And I love that. And that's why I was so drawn to it. And it did work for me as far as like the prenatal care aspect. But then when it came to having to have a medical intervention, and I remember sharing it at the time online with like my Instagram audience, I guess, Instagram community. I remember getting a lot of like judgmental messages from people of that field who were like, you shouldn't have gone in like that. They had their opinions about why I shouldn't have gone for the C-section ultimately, or why I did XYZ wrong. And I just think that that's really arrogant to to put that on a mom. And then of course in the hospital and medical birthing community, you can find people who are totally dismissive of ancestral birthing knowledge and midwifery and natural birthing practices. And I just don't think that anybody should be dismissive of anything when a mom is receiving the care that she needs. And that care and that circumstance can look very, very different. And it's just going to depend. And so just, I think being open-minded to ingesting knowledge from both practices. And even if you can learn everything about all the different ways that people birth, and you can then just be more prepared in the moment to shift and evolve and go through with the process in the way that ends up being safest and most effective for you. So that's my 2 cents about what I've learned after experiencing 2 very different births. And my goal for this time, like I said, is just to have another VBAC, deliver in the hospital, but to have as few interventions as possible regarding, obviously I didn't have good experiences with being induced. I'm trying not to be induced if I don't have to be, though I'm not completely opposed to it. And then I do think I'll get an epidural again because that was a good experience for me. And I just hope, I hope everything goes well. I feel good about, I mean, what can you do, right? Just be hopeful and pray for the best. So, just real quickly, an update on my pregnancy. This is my third pregnancy. I just entered into my third trimester. So I'll give you the overview of what second trimester was like. It went by very fast because, as I mentioned in a previous episode, first trimester was so hard. Nausea, like fatigue, all that stuff was just like took the life out of me. I was so drained. So all of those symptoms pretty much dissipated like on the dot when I reached second trimester, and I have been feeling really good for the most part ever since. I am in general like more exhausted and fatigued, and I'm experiencing more like discomfort, like pelvic pain, abdominal discomfort, like muscular discomfort this time around than I did with my first two. And I don't know if it's because it's just with each subsequent pregnancy, your body becomes a little more like expands more quickly and aggressively and all that stuff, or if it's because I'm a little older or whatever it is, it's a little bit harder this time in terms of experiencing those symptoms. But again, I'm almost grateful for it because I'm like, okay, like for sure, like my body is opening up, my hips are moving, my body's doing what it needs to do and it has done this before. And so that's part of the reason why I feel more confident that this is going to be another VBAC. I don't think I'm going to end up in a C-section again like I did with my first. Once my nausea dissipated, my appetite has been amazing. And I feel like I'm eating really healthy. I mean, just every day trying to get as much protein, healthy fats, well rounded variety of nutrients as I can. I eat a lot of bison, a lot of beef. And I also try to snack on just like a mix of fun snacks and like maybe like walnuts or different cheeses or smoothies or things that are more nutrient based. And then I'll have like, chips, whatever. I'm not like super, super strict with my nutrition. I just want to be fueling myself and listening to my body. Oh, I'm craving juice a lot and fish. So, as much like walleye and salmon as I can, I'm eating a ton of that. Yeah, like a lot of cod, walleye, salmon, things like that. Just like cooked in a lot of butter and salt. This is like the most delicious meal for me. Anything sour or pickled, like I'm loving like beets with goat cheese or like a crunchy, crispy wedge salad with blue cheese, or I'm loving pickles. I'm loving capers, like pickled jalapenos, like anything with that like tangy flavor is really good to me. Oh, I'm just like really thirsty and staying super hydrated all the time. So juices, normally on it, like in a typical regimen, I don't necessarily advocate for doing juices all the time because people say it can spike your sugar and then you're not getting like all the fibers of like the whole fruit. But I'm also eating a lot of whole fruit and getting my fiber in for sure. But in addition to that, there's these juices called pressed. And I mean, they're pressed juices, but it's like a brand that I can buy at Sprouts. And they have one that is like beet and pineapple and something da da da. And they have a few different like citrus ones. Oh my God, they're so sour and tangy and unsweetened and refreshing. I'm loving that. And then my other drink that I'm doing is I'll buy like an organic grape juice or pineapple juice. Those are my two favorite juices. And then I'll have a plain sparkling water, like a can of LaCroix, and I'll pour in like a whole 12 ounce of sparkling water and then just like the ratio, make it like maybe a quarter of the amount of juice and mix it together. And then I'll even make it more tangy by like squeezing in some fresh lemon or lime. Oh, it's so good. And I just like anytime I can drink those like super hydrating juices and sparkling waters, I'm really enjoying that. So those are my cravings. Great appetite, loving that. Again, if I hadn't experienced the harrowing nausea of first trimester, I don't think I would necessarily be so grateful for just simply waking up in the morning and feeling like I want to eat. It's something that I treasure and cherish and enjoy. And So I'm grateful for that perspective. I'm not exercising as much as I did in my first two pregnancies. I was like on a full weight training regimen during both of those. This one, my body is like, slow down, girl. And so I haven't been lifting at all, except for, when I have to carry around my kids. But I've been walking my dog every day. That's definitely what's getting me outside. So shout out to Smokey for keeping me moving. And I try to go for at least 20, 30 minutes walk. And I think that that's been pretty good. And then every so often I'm doing like a yoga, Pilates, stretching kind of thing, but no weight training this time around. This is not advice. I don't know. I don't know if I should be like pushing myself a little harder to do that. And actually, as I continue to feel better as the pregnancy progresses, maybe I will pick that up again and reincorporate that. I do think like a little bit of light strength training is, of course, like very healthy and good to do while pregnant. So we'll see. Maybe I'll pick it back up. I'll let you know if I do. And then I'm just really enjoying sleep. Sleep is one of the 7 circles of wellness that we talk about in our wellness model. I'm very aware that I will sacrifice a lot of sleep once the newborn actually gets here. And I think that's the main difference with this third pregnancy is I'm just not feeling like I want to rush through it at all. I am very happy that I have some time until we get there and just really like intentionally spending quality time with my older two because I know that they will have to make their own sacrifices when brother gets here. And a lot of my time and attention will go toward taking care of the newborn. And they're so excited. It's really cute how excited they are. I'm nesting very, very heavily right now. Like I've always done that. I've always gone hardcore into nesting mode. I like redecorated my girl's bedroom last week. Not like total redecorate, but kind of like a more of a rearrange and hung up some of their own artwork. And I'm just cleaning a lot and organizing and reorganizing and, just preparing. I think it's the nesting instinct is something that naturally kicks in. So that is how the third pregnancy is going. And those are my birth stories. And I hope that some of you found some of that insightful and helpful. And now I want to end on another note. So we talked about perspective. And every week I share at the end of the episode a quote or an excerpt from a book. And typically it comes from indigenous ancestral wisdom. Today I'm going to share something a little bit different. I read an article by Tatiana Schlossberg, who is the granddaughter of JFK and Jackie Onassis. And she is 35 years old and battling leukemia. And the way that she announced her battle with cancer is by publishing an article today in the New Yorker that I read this morning, and it is just sitting heavy on my heart. And it was a beautifully written article. She's an environmental journalist by profession, and absolutely devastating, tragic what she's going through right now. And it just put everything into perspective for me. And I really encourage everybody, look this article up, A Battle with My Blood by Tatiana Schlossberg. So she is enduring medical treatment for leukemia right now. And the way that she found out about it was by delivering her second baby. Her white blood cell count was very high. She had no symptoms. She talked about how athletic and healthy she had been all the way through the pregnancy. I think she said she had swam a mile in the pool at 9 months pregnant, like right before going in to deliver. And then her obstetrician was like, hey, there's something going on with your blood. This is not normal. They prayed and hoped that it was somehow related to the delivery. It was not. It was leukemia. So she was diagnosed basically the day that she gave birth and has been enduring treatments over the last year and a half or so since. Talk about unexpected. Talk about something you could never prepare for. And she's now aware that she's likely not going to survive this cancer after so many of her treatments have failed and the cancer continues to return. So my heart, my love goes out to families who are experiencing these unimaginable tragedies. And so I just want to read one little paragraph Tatiana writes, during the latest clinical trial, my doctor told me that he could keep me alive for a year, maybe. My first thought was that my kids, whose faces live permanently on the inside of my eyelids, wouldn't remember me. My son might have a few memories, but he'll probably start confusing them with pictures he sees or stories he hears. I didn't ever really get to take care of my daughter. I couldn't change her diaper or give her a bath or feed her because of the risk of infection after my transplants. I was gone for almost half of her first year of life. I don't know who really she thinks I am and whether she will feel or remember when I am gone that I am her mother. So, just a moment to consider that. And I think that it's natural for all of us to have our fears and our worries, and then even after our babies arrive, we go through depressions, we go through anxiety, we go through ups and downs with our mental health, with our physical health. And I don't mean to invalidate or belittle any of that from what I've experienced or from what any woman out there has experienced. But what I can say is, in reading Tatiana's story, is boy, does that put a lot of it into perspective for me. It could always be worse. It could always be harder. There are women experiencing the unimaginable right now. So I just want to offer that insight and to say, I guess, to express my gratitude to her and to everyone else who is vulnerable with their stories. We can learn from each other, and I guess in our own way as a community of women and mothers, continue to support each other through these things that we could never imagine, these heartbreaks that no one should experience. And so I just wanted to end with that because it was such a powerful piece and it really gave me a lot of perspective. And I'm just grateful to Tatiana for sharing her story. So with that, please go to the New Yorker, read Tatiana's piece, and continue to take care of yourselves. Continue to be grateful for what health we do have, and, continue to pursue wellness, pursue health, but with that sense of humility and with that sense of gratitude, as opposed to always, the self-criticism and the things that we can get caught up in. Life is too short for that. And the pursuit of health and well-being should always be approached with that perspective of immense gratitude for the privilege to pursue it. So that's the end of the episode for today, and we'll be back pretty soon with another one.